welcome to the Startup Grind.
When you were 6 years old, did you think you'd be running an investment firm?
No.
Do you come from a big city? Where were you born?
In Ulm. Anyone knows Ulm in Germany? Yeah. You come from there?
No.
I've seen you. Well, 100,000 people. Does that qualify?
For Switzerland, that's pretty reasonable. My village has, I think, 175.
Well, I'm from a big city.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so, and as you were growing up, what were your aspirations? Did you dream of working for Microsoft or SAP or Google, or were you entrepreneurial already at a young age?
I've never been asked that question. To be honest, I think I don't remember. My memory doesn't date back actually so long. No, honestly, I think the first time I started thinking about my career was probably when I turned 17 or 18, and I was more concerned about my choice of where and what to study back then, yeah.
So, until you started studying, you didn't have any early ventures in running your own business or anything like that. So how did the idea, jumping forward a little bit, of starting investiere and you being the founder of an investment firm, how did that come about?
I think we could jump to the end of my studies. I studied economics in Berlin, and it took me a long time, I think 6 years or 7, to actually finish it. One of the reasons was that after 4 years or 5, I was convinced by my future business partner to found a company. He had a technical background. I was the economics guy, and it was a small company doing workflow design based on Lotus Notes back then for a Berlin-based company. So there are not many successful companies in Berlin, so you can imagine these were mainly small companies, SMEs, and associations, lots of associations, obviously that probably couldn't afford an SAP system back then, so it needed something more lean and customized. And honestly, I think these 2 years that I spent setting it up were important to me. I then ended up going into management consulting after that first experience, but the idea of being creative and run my own company probably started back then. Yeah.
Okay. So that was your first.
So investiere, sorry. Yeah, you actually.
Yeah. What led up to?
What led up to investiere? I think that started in 2008. I would say. Being an economist, I was always interested in the interface between private sector and entrepreneurship and financial markets, because during my consulting career, I've had most of my clients were investment banks and stock exchanges, etc. And my job was to look at securities trading processes and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, as I explained to you, I had this entrepreneurial virus. So even during my studies and then later, a lot of my work and interest were in that interface. So if you are an economist and you look at today's societies and economies and the challenges we have, then obviously you don't need to be very creative to see that we need to find better solutions for job creation, innovation. And I think, and I'm absolutely convinced that startups and venture capital can make a real difference for our economy. So I think one of the motivations really was a motivation of a economist looking at the macro, aspect of it. But 2 other things fell into place as well. One was that I made my first personal experiences with angel investment. I personally invested back then, in 2 startups. It's actually funny if I think about it today. but it also shows where the idea of investiere came from. You were basically back then relying totally on your friends and family network if you wanted to make angel investments. And obviously, as an economist, again, that is not a transparent market, and it is the likelihood that you pick stuff that is probably not best in class is quite high. And we were surprised that there's no such thing as a platform that pre-selected and interesting investment opportunities in the startup space. So it was actually, meeting my own demand or fulfilling my own needs to have something like that. Yeah, and then the last one is the view of an entrepreneur. Even after my first startup back then, after my studies, I had one or two entrepreneurial detours, and obviously I knew about the problems of the early stage gap, and how difficult it is to raise capital if you don't have much to show and your traction or track record is very short, etc. So these three things came together.
So in your case, you were previously an entrepreneur and now you're an investor, so you understand both sides of the table and the challenges that both parties face.
Yes, I think you can say, I strive to understand and learn every day. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And what advice would you give a young Stefan if you could look back now at yourself and when you were studying? Would you have studied something different, or would you have tried something else?
Well, sometimes I think it would have been interesting to know myself if I had done something completely different, like history of art, because I have these interests that have nothing to do with my life looking back the last 20 years, but I'm 40 now for those that are interested. But I think that's a curiosity that many of you probably also have, that we don't consider ourselves just being that guy who has founded investiere, or that guy who is the investor. I mean,
do you think that entrepreneurs, it's maybe a tricky question, but do you think entrepreneurs are born, or you can cultivate that? It's something that, because a lot of people have an idea, they have that itch to do something, but it takes something special to actually see it through. Do you think you can learn that, or it's more of a, if you're musically gifted, it's because you're musically gifted. It's not because you one day you study that. Of course you can, but so in general, are entrepreneurs born that way, or?
I think it's both. I think you can learn a great lot, and experience is probably more than 50%. But personality traits play a very big role. I mean, all those things that you read about successful entrepreneurs, and I know that there are currently and still studies being done on looking at personalities and the drivers for success for entrepreneurs. It's a never-ending topic. I think it's both true. I think you need to have persistence. You need to have a number of those traits that everyone mentions, and it's all true in a way. But experience and learning is a big part of it. Probably a bigger one.
Yeah. And in a nutshell, what is investiere?
Well, investiere, you could say, is
the elevator pitch.
The elevator pitch. How many seconds? 30 seconds. Investiere is an online venture capital platform, or you could also say a primarily virtual network of business angels and also industry and technology experts, because you need a community of all those people in order to do what we do. Investiere is also by now the second biggest source of venture capital in Switzerland for the early stage, if you take out a number of topics that are more capital intensive, such as drug development and stuff which we don't do. Perhaps if I have one more sentence to add to my pitch, I would say that what we actually strive to do, then investiere, I could say, is the idea to solve all the different puzzles of what's broken in the venture capital industry, from deal sourcing to running a transaction, and also to solve all the challenges post-deal once you have closed the financing round until you can actually exit a company. And our vision is really to go through, look at the whole value chain and try to find creative solutions based on the internet, on social communities, to realize that vision. We still have a long way ahead, but that's our vision.
And as an entrepreneur, how do you find balance in your life? It's also a very important topic amongst startups and amongst entrepreneurs, not to get burnt out. And there's always something more to do. It's a never-ending task. So how do you personally find that balance in your life?
First of all, I'm very glad that you mentioned the topic, because there are so many entrepreneurs who get burned out, and it's still surprisingly a bit of a taboo topic. How many entrepreneurs are here? Everyone? How many of you know people who are close or to being burned out? Or so it's like a third or so. Me personally, I think that's a very difficult subject. I think me personally, I have one trait that I'm just grateful for, because you cannot choose to have that, and that is I can completely switch off. If I go home this evening, no, not this evening actually, but let's say for the weekend, then and I'm with my girlfriend and the kids, I can spend the whole evening without thinking about the company, and it does work for me. And I know people, if I tell this to people think I'm a strange phenomenon, but very, very rarely I wake up thinking about or dreaming about the company or what drives me. But I don't know where this comes from. I think that's a rare trait, but I have it.
And what do you do?
I think that saves me.
What do you do for your leisure time? What hobbies or?
Well, since I have a family, that takes a lot of time. But I love going into the mountains. I'm a big skier. I love climbing. I'm a fan of classical music and jazz. I love red wine, and
that's a good hobby, red wine.
Yeah.
And have you had any I've made it moments?
That's also a good one. I think in our company, me and my co-founder, I think we still hope we're very honest. Sometimes it's hard to say and humble, but no, we actually, to be honest, I think we rather tend to forget to celebrate those moments of success, because you probably all know that if you run your company, if you manage to achieve something, a milestone, you secure a big client or contract or whatever, you just know it's just one step, and the next you think about the next one, and you don't take the time actually to go out and have a beer and say like, wow, this is damn cool. I mean, let's celebrate it. We try to remind ourselves now more to take the time, but I think it's important. Yeah. Also the small successes. Yeah.
And the opposite, any significant failures that you've been?
Of course, all the time. I mean, we test stuff. I mean, all the time. I mean, we iterate. We've done a number of things that didn't work. We've launched financing rounds that didn't work. Not many, luckily. But thinking back, it's clear why they did not work. But sometimes you just need to throw stuff on the market in order to find out. You can sit at your desk and rationalize about the perfect product and the perfect service for a long time, but at the end of the day, it's iteration. I mean, everyone knows that. You probably had 10 startup grind sessions on that topic. Yeah.
Was there like a significant previous business venture, or a major setback, or a significant failure, and how did you recover from that? Something that really hit you hard that was a real struggle for you, or maybe it wasn't a struggle, but not one of the daily failures or trials that didn't work, but something that was could be actually classified as a business venture that didn't work out, and how did you rebound from that? Well, I remember one general assembly that we had in our company that was
if you want, a bit of a setback a couple of years back, because at some point we were not happy with the speed of how we evolved, so we were completely changing our whole strategy and confronted all our shareholders at a general assembly with a completely new vision. And that was plain stupid looking backwards. Probably most of you know why, but that did most of all take a lot of time and hard work to, an individual one-on-ones with everyone to, re-stabilize the whole situation and get on common ground. I don't know if that qualifies as a...
Well, it's an experience.
And there are many experiences like that, but I think these are the things, as you
communication.
Say. The communication and a certain portion of naivety, that we are so honest with our shareholders that we can actually almost turn a general assembly into a discussion session, which is obviously not the purpose of it.
Yeah. And so just to give everyone, I don't know how many people are familiar with the investiere platform. If someone has or someone is interested in funding or is looking for funding, what's, again, the next elevator pitch? What do people do? So there's the investor side, and then there's the startup side. It's a platform for both investors and startups. So what's the first step? I saw one of your auto replies. You guys don't respond to email.
That's another learning. So that brings me to the entrepreneur side. That's a tricky thing, but I still, it's the right thing to do. We really stopped. I mean, when you start running a financing company, then you obviously start receiving business plans and funding requests, and then since you are polite, you write back what the next steps are, and you also feel obliged to then at some point tell people if it didn't work out that it doesn't qualify. I still believe that it's important to give honest feedback, but if you develop more and the number of requests increases, and also if you change your deal sourcing tactics, because we at some point found out that most of the interesting deals that we actually have seen and then also launched on the platform and finance were those that came pre-filtered through the network and not from direct, let's say, contact by people we didn't know. And at that point, we decided that we needed to, change the mechanics and rather provide a tool to entrepreneurs to kind of play with even before they apply for funding. That's why we have basically at some point opened our pipeline of deals, but allowed every entrepreneur to create a profile, get first exposure to our angels and our experts, and we will continue to invest more in that, and then use social signals such as follows, endorsements, of all those experts on the community to kind of pinpoint those companies that we find interesting, and then we pick up the phone and call up these entrepreneurs. So we kind of try to turn it around.
So in short, if you're a startup, you should create a profile on the platform and fill out all the information there and show that you're doing something, get people to vouch for you, share it with your network, and that will attract Steffen's attention. And if you're an investor?
If you're an investor...
just show me the money.
On the investor side, we started, again, that's an evolution. We started being thankful for every investor signing up on the platform, naturally. But at some point, we were also starting to become more picky because we quickly realized that, that's logical if you think about it, that the best companies out there want to have the best investors, not just money. But obviously the right know-how that can really make a difference for your sales, marketing, your technical challenges, or whatever you have. or even prepare your exit. So now the process is as follows. If you're an investor, you need to apply for accreditation. That's a two-step process. First of all, there's a questionnaire that we call an idiot test that asks you a lot of questions on startup investments just to make sure that you know that you can lose all your money, that it's terribly risky, that you need to diversify, etc., etc. The second questionnaire is more on checking international criteria on what is a so-called sophisticated or qualified investor, especially for those not domiciled in Switzerland. That's very important to be regulatorily compliant. Then we also ask the investors to kind of tell us something about them, obviously. So connect their social profiles, tell us about their investment interests and their expertise and their skills, because we need all that information to address those investors that the entrepreneur is actually looking for. Mm-hmm. And then, even then, the investor has no guarantee that he's invited to a financing round, because then the next step is, once we launch an investment proposal, that the entrepreneur can actually pick the applications from the investors. So he receives an email with the profile showing all the background information, and then he is supposed to tell us whether he denies access to his investment proposal individually for these investors, or ask further questions. Look, I'm looking for a certain profile of investor, and can you please add some more information? So there's another important step, I think, that has paid out very well, and it's surprising how open investors are. It's you would imagine that they are so arrogant that if you want their money, then they are not willing to share anything more. But they are actually willing to share a lot of information. That's a very nice experience, and and then you have access to the investment proposal.
Okay. So what advice would you give to someone wanting a Swiss startup, not necessarily a Swiss person, but here in Switzerland, here in Zurich, someone wanting to be a startup or an entrepreneur? What's your top advice?
Many things. One is talk to as many other entrepreneurs as possible. I mean, at events like this, because there's so much to learn from the mistakes of others, and don't think that you have it all under control, because there's so many pitfalls. Also, think international. If you ask me about Switzerland, I mean, I still have to say it's become a bit better, but there's still too much focused on trying to succeed here in this market, and not thinking right from the start what the best or the appropriate market is for their startups, but for their products or services. But, yeah, there's many more things actually.
Yeah. Those are two very key. You're not the only one to mention that. Yeah. So learning from other people's experiences is very key, and think global first instead of trying to make it here. So it's very valuable, and heard it several times, and I think more and more people should try that out as opposed to continuing to try to force the market here. And there seems to be a lot of startups who they reach a certain point, they're ready to start hiring, or they're ready to start getting a few more developers, and sort of the first place that people go to is Berlin. There's Bern would be nice. I don't know where that came from, but there's a lot of people going to Berlin. There's a lot of hype about Berlin. I know also some of the larger startups have expanded their bases. But the nice thing is they've kept a base here as well. But there seems to be a lot of people who actually leave Switzerland to leave Zurich and go to Berlin to further develop their startup there. What do you think about that migration, or what are the challenges they're facing here, or what's the attractiveness of Berlin? Or
well, I spent 7 years in Berlin before I spent 8 years in Switzerland, but I must say I spent that time in Berlin way before the startup hype started. So actually, I should honestly say I'm not an expert on that question, but it's funny to give you some anecdotes. Sometimes when I talk to entrepreneurs who've moved their operations, let's say hired a couple of programmers in Berlin rather than here, then you would assume that they do it for also, not only, but also for the cost of people, so the salary levels, etc. But many of them actually tell me that that this is actually not really true. That if you really look for, I'm not a tech expert, but you probably would agree with me that if you have very specific expertise that you need for your development team or whatever it is, then the differential or the difference between what you will pay here and there is surprisingly little. Actually, that's what I hear often. I'm not sure what your experience is, but you would say it depends.
It's about 30% difference.
30% difference on average.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, obviously there must still be the difference. Otherwise, so many people wouldn't go. And I understand the cultural aspects of the migration as well. I mean, obviously, Berlin is not the Silicon Valley, but you feel the difference. It's not a big surprise that even large corporates who try to get some inspiration and cannot afford to fly to the Silicon Valley travel to Berlin and go to the Beta House and all those collab spaces and startup centers. Yeah, well, to be honest, if you ask me about, I think you actually didn't ask me about the startups that I see in Berlin, right? Or did you?
Well, it's more about the startups from Switzerland.
Yeah. Okay.
Are,
then I shut up.
Anyway, so now we're moving, I guess, away from the more personal questions about you and your business and the development, more into the general realm, which is why we wanted to invite Marc to be here as well, so we could get a broader vision. So Marc Bernegger has joined us as well this evening. He's also a serial web entrepreneur and an investor, and has a lot of experience from that side as well, and we'd like to invite him to join us as well and hear his thoughts. So please welcome Marc. So Marc, what's your elevator pitch? Who are you in 30 seconds?
I'm I. Yeah, that's mostly not related to the business, but I'm an internet entrepreneur now since 15 years. Founded 2 web businesses in the past and sold them, and since around 5 years I'm more on the investment side, focusing mainly on fintech. And besides that, I'm interested in a lot of things, and I think that's one of the attitudes you have to have as an entrepreneur, being passionate about your visions and ideas. I think it's a little bit of pity to see so many new developments where people just start their own company because it's cool to be an entrepreneur. And I think on the long run, most really successful entrepreneurs, they have an inner fire and they want to do something not because of the money. I mean, in the internet space, it's often possible to be quite successful in a short time, but at the end, it's really about your passion and you want to do in your life. And for me, if the side effect is having a successful company with also some nice structure and employees, that's nice, but at the end, it's more about your inner passion.
Mm-hmm. And do you usually use more of a logical approach or a feeling approach when you talk to people you want to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, originally I'm a lawyer, so I have to say I'm very fact-driven. But on the other hand, I have to say most really relevant decisions I made were based on the gut feeling. So I think it's a little bit of a mixture.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I would say go for the gut, because that's something which is definitely more exciting than just always looking at the facts.
Yeah. And for either one of you, how important do you think it is to have the support of big banks in your startup? Because here in Switzerland, a lot of the banks are involved in investment and like to associate themselves with the startup topic. Where do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, from my side, it's a little bit a difficult question because we are financing startups who attack big banks. So that's why, I mean, I have nothing
Don't have that problem.
Yeah. But I mean, in general, I think big banks and startups, it's perhaps coming together or merging, but it's definitely a completely different world. I mean, also in your case, I think.
Yeah, it's really different worlds. If you're talking about Switzerland, it's mainly the cantonal banks that are active in startup investment, and mainly out of those, Zurich Kantonalbank, who are the most active investor. Sometimes even invest out of the Swiss region. And those guys, if you ask me how important is their support, I mean, first of all, it's important that they're there because they really, without them, a large chunk of investment volume would just simply fall away. I don't know, in Switzerland, I don't think the math, but probably 20%. Huh?
They play a key role.
Yeah, they do play a key role.
Swiss
but
investment scene.
At the same time, if you ask how important is the support, not from a money point of view, but from a network or whatever point of view, I would be a bit more hesitant, because obviously they do a lot of deals and they're not a small VC fund doing 3 investments a year and then can completely focus on helping them, supporting them. It's part of their model that they mainly provide the cash. And cannot do much more, even though they strive obviously to do their best. But so, in other words, I think if you're looking for network and skills and really support for your business beyond the money, it's probably not the first choice. You would probably combine a tranche from a cantonal bank with a tranche of other investors that bring you more support. That would be my recommendation.
Switzerland is considered the most innovative country since 5 years. Last year was considered the most innovative country. Why we are not expecting the new Google, the new Facebook? Why in this environment so innovative it's not coming the new big high-tech company?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, you just mentioned it before. I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs, they're aiming to become number 1 in Switzerland. Mostly, this means number 1 in the German part of Switzerland. So you talk about, 4.5 million people. So already going to Germany is a big step, 20 times more people. And you don't have that many entrepreneurs who really have a global ambition. And I think if you want to become the next Google, you have to focus, I would say, on everything else but Swiss-German part of Switzerland. So that's why that's a little bit the thing. Honestly, I think, when you look at the whole pharmaceutical part, there you have a few very big companies, also young companies, but there's a different setup. You're always aiming or looking at the global scale, and that's why I think we need more entrepreneurs really looking outside of our home market.
And one more thing perhaps to add, I completely agree, is that most of the times when you look at these rankings where Switzerland ranks very well in terms of innovation, exactly, what they're measuring are number of patents, for example, issued and these kind of things. And there's obviously a huge difference between having all this intellectual property and these great, inventions and patents and technologies, but if there must be a problem with the transfer, obviously, of this capital, this intellectual capital into execution, into startups, and I think that's the reason. That's where we have some challenges here in Switzerland. I'm sure about that.
Actually, if I may contribute another point there, and I think this touches on Berlin as well. Switzerland is a fairly conservative community, shall we say. They're known to be risk averse, and risk aversion and entrepreneurship doesn't generally mix well. Berlin, I would say, is almost the polar opposite.
Yeah, and I think one reason, I mean, I was born here, and most of my friends are somehow related to the financial industry. So you have a very good life without really doing the extra mile, and I think that's a huge issue. I mean, if you perhaps
I think they're all lazy.
Yeah, I mean, they have a 9-to-5 job, have a 6-digit salary, and are not extremely smart. So it's a good way to live. So doing the extra mile, earning nothing, and have the whole risk. I mean, that's different when you start from there compared to other regions where you have not this good starting opportunity just because you live in Greater Zurich area, for example.
Hi, my name is Julia. I have a question for both of you. 3 things that you look for in a founder you want to invest in, and what are 3 red flags? So things that say, no, I do not want to invest in that guy.
Yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit on the stage. I mean,
You do ping pong, you do one, I do
okay, yeah, early stage, I mean, it's all about the team, so they have to be sticky on their idea. Also, if you say that this is a red flag, this is a red flag, so stickiness.
I really look at what some people call coachability, but it's probably doesn't really. Probably those English native speakers can probably give me a better word for it. But a red flag is if the entrepreneur gives me the feeling that he knows everything.
So it's just one red flag, right?
That would be a strong red flag. Yeah.
So
Unfortunately, it happens a lot.
So I have good positive things and you yeah, so I think passion is also something which is extremely important. As I mentioned in the beginning, you see a lot of, let's say, former consultant entrepreneurs. They analyze the market and they see there's a huge opportunity, but they don't really have the passion to do something. So I think a real entrepreneur has to be passionate about the venture he's starting.
Yeah, teams. There was one gentleman here who I talked to before we started. Positive is if I have a feeling that it's a strong founding team, not just a one-man show. I don't know what your opinion is. Let's discuss after this session. But I'm not saying that one-man shows can't work, but experience shows that it's good to have someone that you love to work with and that you respect a lot and is complimenting you, and you have someone like that right from the beginning and not just, trying to hire him at a later point in time.
Yeah, I would say what's always important, and that was something I learned from an entrepreneur, now shifting a little bit more on the investment side, is the market size. I mean, you have a lot of extremely cool and fancy ideas, but when you look at the market, it's just not really that relevant. I mean, I remember at Amiando when we pitched, the investors always wanted to see a 2 billion market. So they say when you take 1% of this market, you generate relevant turnover. So that's a little bit the metrics behind it. And that's really something, I mean, back then I thought that's more the fancy VC stuff. So you just created some big market and everything was fine. But honestly, I mean, why the travel market generates so big companies and other industries, it's just because you need a certain relevant market size. And I think that's something which sometimes is missing. Also, if you're passionate or if you have a good team and everything, if you're just targeting the small market who's too small, you won't become a really big company. Not a bad thing. Difficult part. But tell something good at the end. So.
Well, something good at the end. Let's just go through the last meetings I had. I like, perhaps it has to do with what I previously said, but I also like entrepreneurs that share my conviction that it's good to have checks and balances and good governance and a board that's really strong and not just saying yes to everything they want. Well, at the latest, when you think about your first significant financing round, because obviously then you will have to think about governance and whether you actually mean to be surrounded by people who can challenge you really, or if you just think, well, those people that give me money obviously want a board seat, and so let's keep their influence and their intelligence as limited as possible. So yeah, that's a good moment to start thinking about it.
Hi, this is a question for both of you. So back to the concept of scaling internationally or having a more international focus. What initiatives do each of you have at Investiere or Next Generation Finance that initiatives or partnerships that help your investments and the entrepreneurs you work with to scale outside of Switzerland?
Yeah, I mean, normally it's all about a certain network. I mean, I would say depending on the industry you're into, you need hubs where you have local ambassadors, multipliers, whatever, who help you to scale your business. I mean, for example, also with my last own company, we had the Asian region, South American, North American, so in every continent you had some people who were able to give you at least a kickstart in the beginning, and after that normally you have to do everything on your own. So then I would say it's all about having the right contacts in the right hubs and cities to really scale an existing business or product internationally. And that's also something I think at this point the right investor, the smart money investor, is extremely important, because normally as an entrepreneur you put into a product or whatever, but especially when you do something the first time, you don't have, I mean, here we have quite a few expats, so perhaps you have a better network than the regular entrepreneur, but in general, I mean, you're a little bit limited to the places where you grew up, and I think at least in this field, the smart money approach or the international network of an additional shareholder is extremely important.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's, if you ask me what initiatives do we really have, then I would say they're not really initiatives, but it's an important aspect of everything we do. One is the network factor that we've discussed already. Obviously, you want to make sure that you have enough people in your investment network, for example, that actually do have experience with, let's say, the US market, for example, if that's of interest, and if your business is actually interesting actually for this type of markets, the nice thing about our model is that you immediately automatically call the attention of these people with this background, because they see this in you and they would approach you, and then it's up to you to also make something out of this. Also this governance topic and having a strong board, I think sometimes we even force, very rarely, but force is a strong word, but sometimes we strongly suggest a board member who we know is forcing, internationalization. Because there are really, I mean, you always make compromises, but there are really a lot of those great entrepreneurs, but and they might even tell you that they have no problem with internationalization, but when it comes to really doing it, they need someone who is constantly pushing. So we try to kind of facilitate a little bit this.
Heading in the right direction.
Yes. Yes.
Without pressure.
Yeah, without pressure.
Hi. I have a question. So based on your experiences working with startups, seeing the potential startup and the journey of it, what are the typical failures that startups make that you can say, if only they don't do it, they could fail?
So you mean, is there something recurring that you see often?
Besides giving up.
Yeah, I think normally that's quite straightforward. It mostly takes much longer than expected. I mean, that's
it costs more.
Yeah, it costs more. Mostly it costs more because it takes longer. but I hardly know any startup, and also the extremely successful ones, who really fulfill the original plan. I mean, I think even Google, they had an even more ambitious plan at the beginning, so still quite successful. I think that's a little bit a key driver. So every time you look at the business plan, you should just put an additional, 50% on the roadmap. And then sometimes the whole metrics, they change completely. So you need more money, you need more resources, it's more painful, the success takes longer. So it changes the whole game quite a lot, I think.
Yeah, one favorite of mine to add to that is pointing out or reminding entrepreneurs to keep their shareholders close and informed. Because many think it's a pain in the ass. They have to do it, writing a quarterly report or half-yearly, or even updating your investors. But it's simply not just a nuisance, but a real benefit if you do so. I would very strongly recommend to keep them close, because you want a close relationships for a number of reasons. They need to know what's going on, so they can help you. Secondly, if things go bad, there's much more willingness to support you if they were always informed closely. And thirdly, if you raise again money, it's easy if you have a number of angels, 10, 20, to actually double or even triple the last investment round, because they invest smaller amounts, so it's easier for you if you invest 20K to do 40K the next time. But they will all just do that only if they feel that you respect them and keep them informed and closely. And honestly, I think we all do a very bad job at reporting.
You had a question on the side?
So I have the mic.
Yes.
You both said that you're looking for a good team. How do you define a good team?
How do you define a good team?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a little bit boring, but I mean, passion is really, I think, one of the key drivers. I mean, you can be extremely smart and, having had very good graduation or whatever, but at the end, I mean, you have to feel that this guy is really, he's not just throwing a business plan at you and it looks nice, but he's really behind it, and he's really, I mean, it's his vision, his full passion to fulfill this vision. And I think that's at the end, it's not really something, I mean, perhaps you have more fact-driven indicators, but I think for me, especially the projects I supported, which really went in the right direction, is what was always the team behind it, which was completely committed to this case.
I would agree. I would also try to get your attention for a certain type of passion that I find interesting. That's the passion not of let's say the founders, but the other team members. So it's interesting to look at, let's say you have a startup team with 6 people and 2 founders and 4 that came, joined the company a couple of months later. If I talk to those, you get a feeling for the identification with the topic and the drive behind and passion behind those, and that shows a lot about the founders. Again, it shows a lot about the dedication of the whole team, the passion of the whole team for making this company a success. Because if you have an employment attitude with the rest of the people, it's probably not a good sign. Yeah.
I have a question to Steffen on investiere. You described investiere as a network for business angels. And when you said that, I had to think, of course, of angels.
Yeah.
So how do you differentiate investiere from angels?
It's a very good question. I think AngelList is very, very interesting, and I truly mean it. I have a lot of respect for what those guys are doing, and it's a constant inspiration for what we do. I would say that there are a number of things where I believe that it's not that angelists make mistakes, but it's not relevant for them. For example, being compatible to a European situation. Let's put it this way: the Silicon Valley and California is a very special place, and the AngelList DNA, the processes and the way it works, the strong focus on, for example, lead investors that are well known all over the place and that basically deserve or not deserve unlimited trust, so they can build a syndicate or a small fund around them. There are many of those ideas that work extremely well for AngelList in their context where they come from, but I think this model needs some adaptation to the European context, because here we have less known superstar business angels, and we have a history in Europe of not switching off our brain, but being very critical and making up our own minds. I think business angels here need more transparency and want to be taken more serious. And you need to provide transparency more equally to all the co-investors within a round in Switzerland and Europe than in the US, where speed is everything. If you would give everyone the same information, then you would simply not be in a deal. And AngelList, I don't know how many of you have tried using AngelList. Speed. I'm having a question to you. Speed is very critical. I mean, you can close rounds very quickly, and the good thing is for the entrepreneur, it can go like this if you have the right leads. No stupid questions from anyone else, and you're done. After a long story, I think that's just one example of a number of little things that I think, and I'm convinced, that need to be adjusted a little bit to our context where we operate in. How were your successes or your experience with AngelList? Did it work?
I'm invested in 14 companies.
As an investor?
As an investor.
Yeah, 14.
Yeah. A lot of my deal flow comes from AngelList.
Yeah.
So it's just an instrument to get, in contact or see what's going on, because I think 80% of all deals are listed there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of truth what you're saying, but they're so big that platform at the moment. So we can talk probably later, but you cannot put that in just in one thing.
I fully agree.
Say a syndicate, because you had, for example, last year the regulation change, where you have, I'm not sure if everybody knows that, with the accredited investor over there, where they changed that a little bit and open up so that for the first time startup can solicitate and say they're raising a round. That was not possible before last year, and they're doing a lot in that term, in terms of making that invested in that asset available to the general public. Where, okay, if I'm here talking, so my question is, you having a much higher higher entry barrier, where I'm not sure, 10,000, 15,000 francs for every investors. What I see here in Europe is, for when you look at the platforms in Germany, where you can invest as less as 5 euros. So why did you make that decision?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we made the right decision to come to the conclusion first, but it's a tricky one. I mean, there's a number of reasons for it. First of all, while I do not believe that the depths of the pockets of an investor have to do with his skills and relevance and whatever or smartness as an investor, I do believe that it's important that the motivation behind an investment must be also entrepreneurially motivated. We wanted investors on investiere that do really identify and do care to think about their deliberately made investment decisions. If you go down to 5 euros, you can imagine you will get much more, and you will attract much more investors that just simply shoot around and play, which is fine. It might be even economically viable, but it's just not our DNA. And then the last and actually experience shows that the threshold of 10K is not a bad one. We've experimented a lot with these amounts and looked at the type of investors, so I can tell you from experience. But obviously, again, I'm not individuals. You would have to look at individuals because obviously it's difficult to talk about averages again. But and the last aspect I think that I want to point out here is that there is one of the big challenges in venture capital is pooling investors, and unfortunately, in the UK and in the Anglo-Saxon world, that's easier to do. But it can, all these vehicles and constructs have their pros and cons. The more you go down with your entry tickets, the more shareholders you end up having at the end, which has pros and cons. However, I think in order to have a manageable group of investors that are entrepreneurially minded, as I said before, it makes things, at least in the Swiss context, easier. In that respect, I can give you more detail on that later.
Yeah. So building on that topic a little bit of investing €5, what do you think of crowdfunding? It's a completely different world of investment. It's not really investment, but it's another way of entrepreneurs funding their company. What do you think of that approach? Mark?
I think crowdfunding is definitely extremely interesting for end customer products. I mean, you can, out of your customers, you make some small shareholders. I mean, if you do equity crowdfunding or multipliers, if you do some non-equity based crowdfunding, but something Steffen already mentioned. I mean, if you want to have a real commitment and also perhaps a more active role of your supporters, I think you need some critical level. I mean, 10,000, I don't know, you know it better, but I think there's definitely more involvement if you feel some pain, if it's not working out. And that's why I think it's a little bit, there are two different cases.
I would agree. I think there are two different games and also two different use cases. As Marc said, I think, well, one way of answering is I can say that I love crowdfunding. I really love what Kickstarter does and Indiegogo does. And actually, all the consumer good and retail startups that we see, I would love to see them all going first to Kickstarter and Indiegogo, etc. Because I think it's a just very clever idea to prove that what you think is going through the roof does actually work. Then they can come to us and raise their significant first rounds of 1 or 2 million. That's fine, but do that first. I think it's in that. In the chronological way, it's a step before of what we do, and I'm a great fan of it. I think it's fantastic.
So we have a question that was sent in by email to Marc specifically. Which area of fintech is the biggest potential market in your opinion? Consumer lending, personal banking, social trading, money transfer, security?
Yeah, difficult question. Also depending on, as an investor, I think you're fully focusing on, let's say, short to mid-term disruptive models. I mean, I truly believe that the whole private banking wealth management space will change completely, but this will take 5 to 20 years from now. And when you look at other models like, peer-to-peer lending is already emerging, social trading is already extremely profitable in most cases. So it's a little bit depending on the perspective, but I mean, I think what people are sometimes a little bit missing out is that the regulation is still a huge issue in this field, and compared to most other industries, I mean, in the worst case, you need experience to be able to run a company in the fintech space. You need, in the worst case, a banking license, and you need a compliance officer from day one. So the setup cost and the entry barrier are really massive. And that's also one of the reasons why the whole industry is still quite protected by the status quo. And that's why I think, a lot of these new companies are a little bit nagging on the existing value chains, and there are already a few ones working out very well. But I think for the real shift it takes in most of these areas you just mentioned. It needs quite a few years to be really at the same level, like, for example, e-commerce or the whole information or data-driven businesses already today.
Yeah, okay. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. And I see 5 or 10 hands.
First.
Who has the microphone?
Okay, thank you very much.
Who's the lucky person with the microphone?
Right, like it, okay. Find it very interesting. I think you hear me, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting what you said before. What do you think is important? You said passion and stick to your idea. You said you want people who knows that they don't know everything and are coachable. And so concerning the concrete discussions with investors, I found it interesting when I should stick to my idea, to my way, to my strategy, to my passion. When should I know that I'm probably on the wrong way and the investor has a good idea which I should take? I think this is a very difficult thing. Or maybe I have the wrong investor. Yeah.
I see where you're coming from, but isn't it just is it really a contradiction? I don't think it is. I think if you're intellectually honest, you can be perfectly passionate. I mean, the thing is, as a matter of fact, you don't know everything, and you can. And I think investors and angels appreciate a lot if you show where your weaknesses are and where they can also help and support, and where you're unsure and unclear about your strategy and tactics and all those things. That's one thing, but at the same time, they want to see that you are going the extra mile, that you are really driven by the idea and that vision. I think there are two different things. Do you really think you might get into a conflict if you try to follow both rules?
Yeah, I just got some examples where this is especially happens, where the investors say, okay, put away the service, just make the software.
Yeah.
And our idea is, no, we have to stick it together. So,
yeah.
And this is a complete different way. So now, am I wrong? I have to think it over? Or is the investor didn't get my idea? Mm-hmm. So I think this is really difficult. And I have no solution. I find it in some cases like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, stickiness is not the same like stubbornness. So, from an investor's perspective, it's always easy looking back and then you know who was right. But I think, as I just said, you have a lot of passionate entrepreneurs with very crazy ideas, and this doesn't mean that their ideas are wrong, but perhaps if you see that something is not working out, perhaps that doesn't mean that you need passion anymore, but perhaps you should modify your idea a little bit and focusing on the things who really work out. So, but I don't know your case in detail, but yeah, I think that's a thin line between stickiness and stubbornness. So,
pass the mic. For me, who else? Somebody else has a question?
So, okay, I'm not sure if this is working, but I guess you can hear me as well. And we talked a lot about people already and about the importance of the founding team. And my question is whether your interest as an investor goes beyond that, which means, do you ask questions about people hired after you make the deal? So about the talent kind of strategy that would be implemented in the startup.
Let me rephrase just to make sure I understood your question.
Yeah.
The question is, do we ask questions on hiring decisions, for example, after we have invested in a company?
Yes. Does your interest in people goes beyond
the investment round?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. I think obviously the first is very important because it's hard to correct your investment decision. But hiring and recruiting, probably Mark, you agree, I think is one of the key things that most of you probably experience. It's a tricky one and it's a challenging subject. And because you're bootstrapped, you have to, you know the problems. You have little resources, but you need the best people, and these compromises and things are very, very challenging. And I think, well, we do care. We're actually thinking of supporting even more in that sense, because we have this community and could actually help much more there. But knowing that it's such an important aspect of the success of the company, I think yes, it should not stop there, and we still care.
Okay. And do you have any interest in particular in particular qualities, characteristics of the people? That we talked a lot about the passion, and you mentioned also that that in fact the experience is something that matters in the end, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you have an interest for particular characteristics that are shown by such candidates, potential hires to do this startup.
I mean, there are actually companies focusing on recruiting on early stage companies.
Mm-hmm.
So. And I mean, I saw quite a few companies with a very cool team, but perhaps they're just nerds and they're missing a cool sales guy. So this could be also a job for an investor to finance a business and find the perfect missing piece in the whole management team. And I mean, I think that's also one of the roles of a smart money investor, that he also tries to complement the not yet finished management team.
Alright, so this is really then the focus on the management.
Yeah, I think so. It's all about the people. I mean, founders normally don't. I mean, if they fulfill all profiles you need, that's great. But I mean, after growing or when you grow, you definitely need some additional employees, and I think that's. I mean, you normally don't go for the trainees, but every decision maker or relevant job position, which is crucial for the future development of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, quite essential for all shareholders involved.
So one question from the audience.
Yes, so my question would be, you already told a bit more, and I checked on the website how the process works, but how concretely does it work, let's say from the start, like we start talking later on, but also to the point where you would start, where you would say we invest, and then also going forward, how often would we interact, could we interact, and how close or not close would the interaction be, actually from both of you?
Well, I try to give the short version. So well, the usual process is once you caught our attention, we, compared to other investors, we try to find someone with industry experience right from the beginning, before we actually go deeper in your business plan, meet with you, because we have this community and we really want to leverage the community right from the beginning. We call that step the curation, because we call these people curators. They don't write a long report, but they kind of look at it high level and pinpoint us to the key questions, so that once we meet you in the next step and work with your business plan, and that's actually very iterative, can be 2, 3, or even more sessions where we come together, and it's not us asking questions all the time, but really we're discussing key challenges of your business. That's actually how we mainly do our assessment. And then we take an investment decision.
When you say we,
make an offer,
investiere or the actual investors as well?
That's before we launch you on the platform. That's basically part of our pre-selection process. Yeah.
And so I guess part of the question was then afterwards, how often is it? So again,
once you are launched.
Yeah, I mean, also from that step, when you say, well, we publish you with a profile.
Yes.
So I guess investors can say, well, I like this or I don't like it. So there's another kind of matchmaking round.
Yeah, well, there two aspects are important. First, it's really when we first launch you, then there's a kind of a self-selection happening, because you will obviously only attract people that have a certain exposure from their industry, technical, whatever point of view. Those people can use an online Q&A room to ask questions. These answers that you give are visible for all those investors that you approve and are interested in you. So it's very efficient. You have interaction, but it's really focused on efficiency. You don't have to answer the same questions all over again, like it usually is when you do the tour between all the business angel clubs, etc. And then there will also be one physical investor meeting that we offer, but one usually is enough, where those people, after having all the interaction online, that still want to meet you personally can actually meet you and ask you questions. Does that answer the question?
Now, let's say just like 5 angels say we want to invest. Maybe we meet up, maybe not. Yeah. So we start, the investment is done, we start operating. How do I interact with them, or how often actually? Or how am I actually also supported by them?
I see. Look, these are your angels from the moment they invest, and our main job for the moment is done because we wanted to facilitate this process, right? So you're totally free to interact with your business angels, and we encourage that. We also become an investor. That's something I forgot to mention in the beginning, actually. In order to show that we believe in the stuff that we select, we always invest ourselves money into you. So we are aligned with these 4 or 5 business angels that have invested in you, and we receive the same information, and therefore that's much easier for us to also support you, and also with your interaction after the financing round, because we're sitting on the same boat.
Just one super quick question. It's a question to Steffen. What is the average size of a round raised through investiere? And the second part of the question is, how much equity do you ask for? Is there any benchmark?
I should have checked out the exact numbers before I came.
Doesn't have to be exact.
Yeah, no, I know. So over the last 12 months, I think the average is something like 450, but I would have to do the maths again.
Francs, right?
450,000 francs. Yeah. That's usually the angel tranche. That's ranging between, we still have sometimes cases of just a 200 plus, but we also have cases that go up to 720. So something in between. And equity we take now. Do you usually refer to the valuations also? So this chunk of investment, how much equity do you get for it?
Yeah, on average, right?
On average. That's actually a good one. I mean, we do Series A, B, and C in different industries, so you would actually have to differentiate a little bit. But for a Series A, let's say in an ICT context, for example, because I assume most of you guys are in that context, you would probably give away between 20 and 30%.
Okay, thanks.
So to wrap up, we have a few interesting, fun questions that we ask everyone. All of our
fun for whom?
Fun for them. No, fun for everyone, I think. Normally there's only one person. We have 10 questions, so we'll just alternate back and forth.
The good ones for me.
So the first thing that comes to mind, really, it's rapid fire questions, just really quick. So, Steffen, what item do you own that you would never sell?
What do I own that I would never sell?
What is one item you own that
my violin?
Your violin. Marc, what is your most unusual skill? Yodeling?
Sorry? No yodeling. Dancing when I'm drunk.
We have more beer tonight, right? So, what is more important, strength, speed, or stamina, Steffen?
Stamina.
What historical figure do you most admire, Marc?
Oh, that's a good one. Historical means he's dead.
It doesn't have to be, but...
No, I go for Elon Musk. He's still alive, but could become a legend.
And what's the best compliment you can receive?
That I made myself replaceable.
And Mark, what's the best compliment you give to others?
I see your passion.
And who do you think does a good job?
Me?
Yeah.
Who do I see does a good job?
Who do you think? Who do you know that does a good job?
Elon Musk.
What is your favorite season, Mark?
My favorite?
Season of the year?
Summer.
Winter.
When was the last time you tried something new? This is for both of you.
Last weekend. How do you call this? Upseiling in
Abseiling.
Abseiling.
Down a mountain.
Yeah, 160 meters an overhanging cliff. I mean, I didn't have to do anything but just jump.
Last time now to answer in a crowd funny questions, which are much more difficult than the part before.
So one more to wrap up for both of you. If you could have the attribute of any animal, what would you choose?
The stubbornness of a donkey.
I think a gecko would be nice.
Gecko.
Yeah.
What's the attribute that the stickiness?
No, he can change his appearance, and he's invisible.
Comedian.
No, the gecko, you know, not the comedian. Or what do you mean?
So the one that changes colors is called a comedian.
Aha, okay.
Not a comedian.
Yeah, not a comedian then, yeah.
Comedian. Yeah. Cool. That's very nice. So thank you very much, Marc and Steffen, for joining us this evening and for your insights. It was very insightful for myself and I believe for everyone as well. You'll still be around for a little bit, so I think if you have any other questions, feel free to approach Marc and Steffen. And there's a few other investors in the crowd as well. I don't know if you want to make yourself visible, but no one already. But once again, thank you for coming. Thank you to SAP for hosting us tonight and for the nice food and drinks. And for all of you for making this a very interesting and inspiring event. Have a nice evening.